What happens when a national treasure walks onto a daytime talk show, only to be met with a host who seems determined to tear her down? In just over 30 seconds, a polite question turned into a public humiliation, a moment that left one of Britain's most beloved actresses walking, offset in quiet disgust, and a talk show host scrambling to justify her behavior. This is the story of how Denise Welch went too far. It began like any other episode. The lights were bright, the audience buzzing, the air thick with excitement. Today's guest was none other than Dame Judi Dench, the kind of name that makes a room fall silent out of sheer respect. She was elegance personified, dressed immaculately, smiling warmly as she took her seat. She'd come to talk about her new film, a project she cared deeply about. And at first, everything felt perfectly ordinary. Denise greeted her with that familiar daytime TV smile, the one that promises warmth but hides calculation. The cameras rolled, the applause faded, and for a brief moment it looked like another friendly, easygoing chat. But that illusion didn't last long. Well, Denise began, turning to the camera with a grin. We've got Dame Judi Dench with us today. Always a pleasure, Judi. Always. Judi nodded, gracious as ever. She'd been through thousands of interviews over the decades. The good, the bad, and the downright awkward. And she'd handled them all with dignity. There was no reason to expect this one would be any different. Until Denise leaned forward. So, Judi, she said, tilting her head slightly. You're here to talk about your new film. But I have to ask, do you ever get tired of playing the same kinds of roles? You know, the wise older woman, the queen, the mentor. Doesn't it ever get a bit repetitive? The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. It was one of those questions that didn't sound innocent, no matter how it was phrased. The kind laced with a quiet insult that everyone could hear. Judi took a breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, as if she'd already forgiven the tone. I don't think of it that way, she said gently. Every role has its own story, its own life. Each one teaches me something new. It was the perfect answer. Thoughtful, generous, graceful. But Denise wasn't finished. Right, she said, her smile tightening. But come on. How many times can you play a queen or a dame or someone sitting in a manor house giving advice? Don't you ever want to do something a bit more modern? Something that actually connects with people today? The word hung in the air, today. A deliberate bob. The audience winced. Everyone understood what Denise was implying. That Judi Dench, one of the most acclaimed actresses in the world, had somehow become irrelevant. It wasn't a question anymore. It was an insult dressed up as journalism. The younger host tried to interject, her voice small but hopeful. I think what's so amazing about your career, Judi, is your range. But Denise cut her off. She wasn't letting go. And that was the moment the tone of the room changed completely. She waved her hand dismissively, cutting the younger host off mid-sentence. Denise was in full control now. Or at least, she thought she was. Her tone had shifted from curious to combative, and she wasn't about to let anyone interrupt her. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to crack Dame Judi Dench. The audience felt it. The shift. That electric discomfort that crawls through a studio when someone crosses an invisible line. Some people looked down, fidgeting in their seats. Others just stared, wide-eyed, realizing they were watching something they probably shouldn't be. Judi sat perfectly still. She took a slow, deliberate breath. Her trademark smile was still there, but it had thinned into something almost mechanical. A mask held firmly in place. Behind her eyes, though, the warmth was gone. What replaced it was resolve. Cold, measured, unmistakable. She'd spent her life dealing with critics, egos, provocations. She knew when someone was asking questions, and when someone was simply being cruel. And this wasn't journalism. This was mockery, I think. Judi said carefully, her tone still calm but unmistakably firm. That every role has value, whether it's modern or classical, relatable or not. I choose parts that speak to me, and I'm proud of the work I've done. The audience applauded softly, a flicker of support. But Denise didn't even glance their way. She leaned back smirking, arms folded like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. "Okay, but let's be honest, Judi," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Some people might say you've been playing it safe for years, doing what's comfortable, and maybe that's why younger audiences aren't connecting with you anymore." The words landed like a slap. The room froze. Denise kept going, emboldened by the silence. "They see you as someone who was great." Emphasis on was. "But not really doing much now. Maybe you're just coasting on reputation?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The other hosts looked horrified. One stared at the floor, another mouthed something under her breath, and a third simply shook her head in disbelief. But the cameras didn't stop. They caught everything. The tension, the humiliation, the flicker of fury that crossed Judi's face before she contained it. When Judi finally spoke again, her voice was lower, steadier, almost regal. "Denise," she said quietly, "I've been in this industry for over 60 years. I've worked with the greatest directors and actors of our time. I've played women of every age, class, and temperament, and I've always tried to bring honesty and depth to my work. If that's what you call playing it safe, then we clearly have very different definitions of artistry." It was dignified, controlled, devastating. But Denise didn't stop. She let out a short, hollow laugh, the sound of someone cornered but pretending not to be. "Oh, come on, Judi," she said, waving her hand again, dismissive and careless. "Don't take it so personally. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." The audience groaned audibly. "You're brilliant, obviously," Denise continued, voice rising. "But maybe it's time to admit that your best days are behind you. There's no shame in that. We all get old. We all slow down." The words hung in the air like poison. And that was the breaking point. "It's just the way life works," Denise said with a shrug, her tone breezy, her words laced with arrogance. "You've had an incredible run, Judi. But maybe it's time to step aside. Let the next generation have their moment, you know." "What I mean?" The casualness of it was breathtaking. The cruelty of it, staggering. She said it as if she were commenting on the weather, not sitting across from one of the most revered actresses of all time. In that moment, Denise Welch wasn't interviewing Dame Judi Dench. She was dismissing her, telling her with a smirk and a wave that she was past her prime, that her time was up. That was the breaking point. That was when Denise crossed the line from provocative to unforgivable. The audience reacted instantly. A collective gasp filled the room. Some viewers in the front row shifted uneasily. Others stood as if ready to leave. It was too painful, too disrespectful to witness. One of the other hosts, clearly panicked, tried to interject, stammering something about moving on, about talking about the new film Judi was there to promote. But it was too late. The damage was done. The words had landed like blows, hanging heavy in the air, poisoning the atmosphere beyond repair. Denise had insulted a legend, not through anger but through casual cruelty. She had belittled a woman who had dedicated her life to the craft, and she'd done it with a smile. And Judi Dench, ever composed, ever regal, stood, slowly, deliberately. She didn't rush, she didn't storm. She simply rose with the kind of poise that can't be taught. Every movement radiated control, dignity, grace. She adjusted her jacket, lifted her chin, and looked directly at Denise. Her eyes were cold, not furious but piercingly disappointed. There was sadness there, too. Not sadness for herself, but for what the moment had revealed. A lack of respect, a loss of decency. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I came here today," she began, "to talk about my work, to share something I'm proud of, to connect with people who still believe in storytelling, in performance, in art. I did not come here to be insulted by someone who clearly has no respect for what I've given to this profession." The audience was silent. Judi's words carried a weight that no retort could touch. "I did not come here to be told that I am irrelevant, outdated, or past my prime," she continued, her voice unwavering. "For over 60 years, I've devoted myself to this craft. I've worked with extraordinary people. I've poured my heart into every role I've ever played, and I will not sit here and allow you to belittle that. I will not give you that power. I deserve better, and quite frankly, so does your audience." She paused. The silence was deafening. Denise opened her mouth, perhaps to backtrack, perhaps to save herself, but Judi raised a single hand, a quiet, commanding gesture that stopped everything. That hand said it all. Enough. Denise froze mid-breath. For the first time, the smugness was gone. The confidence drained from her face. What replaced it was something smaller. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. "No," Judi said softly but with finality. "You've said quite enough. I think it's time for me to leave." And with that, she turned and walked off set. Her steps were measured, graceful, resolute. She didn't look back. She didn't stumble. She simply left, head high, shoulders straight. Every inch the dame she was. The cameras followed her exit, the audience still frozen in disbelief. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others sat stunned, unable to speak. Dame Judi Dench, the icon, the legend, had just walked off live television. Not in anger, but in dignity. Because enough was enough. And for the first time that day, Denise Welch looked small, flushed, trembling, utterly alone at her own table. The other hosts avoided her eyes. The applause never came. There was only silence, the kind that tells you, without a word spoken, that a line has been crossed and can never be uncrossed. Then she turned to the audience, searching, almost pleading, for some sign of agreement, for someone who might nod in solidarity or laugh to ease the tension. But there was nothing. Rows of faces stared back at her, blank with disbelief, some tight with disappointment. A few shook their heads slowly, silently condemning what they'd just witnessed. When Denise looked back at the camera, the mask slipped for the briefest second. Beneath the forced composure, there was panic. Real panic. The kind that comes when you suddenly realize you've gone too far, and there's no undoing it. She had lost control of the room, of the moment, of herself. But then, in the way only Denise could, she tried to laugh it off, as if charm could rewrite the truth. "Well," she said, forcing a brittle smile, "that was unexpected. I guess some people can't handle a bit of honesty, can they?" No one laughed. Not the audience, not her co-hosts. The silence was brutal. The air felt thick, unbreathable. Denise tried to push through it, her voice faltering as she said, "Right, well, let's move on, shall we? Plenty more to talk about today." But everyone knew the show was already over in spirit. Whatever came next didn't matter. Denise Welch had just insulted Dame Judi Dench, and Judi had walked out. That was the headline. That was the story. As the show cut abruptly to commercial, chaos broke out behind the scenes. Producers huddled frantically, whispering, gesturing, trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of the broadcast. What had begun as a routine interview had turned into a career-defining disaster. When filming resumed, the set felt hollow, the energy dead. The hosts went through the motions, reading lines, smiling on cue. But the spark was gone. Every word carried the weight of what had just happened. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Denise sat frozen at the table. No one spoke. A producer approached her, eyes sharp with disappointment. Others whispered nearby, exchanging pointed glances. Denise tried to defend herself. "I was just being honest," she insisted. "People need real talk. I wasn't being rude. I was being real." But no one was buying it. Not the producers. Not her co-hosts. Not even herself. Meanwhile, Judi Dench had already left the building. No statement, no social media posts, no theatrics. She simply walked away, her dignity untouched. That was the difference. Judi didn't need to defend herself. Her career, her grace, her body of work, those spoke louder than any rebuttal ever could. Back on set, Denise made one last attempt at validation, turning to one of her co-hosts, the one who'd stayed silent throughout the ordeal. "You saw that, right? I wasn't out of line. I was just being honest." The other woman hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Denise," she said softly, "you went too far. Judi's a legend. She deserved better." For once, Denise had no comeback. She just stared at the table, her hands clasped tightly together, her face pale. It seemed to hit her all at once. The scale of what she'd done. She hadn't just lost her composure. She'd lost the audience, her credibility, and perhaps a part of her reputation that could never be reclaimed. The hours that followed were a blur. The network scrambled to contain the fallout, but the clip had already gone viral. Online, the verdict was unanimous. "Good for Judi Dench," one viewer wrote. "She's earned the right to be treated with respect." Another comment read, "Denise crossed a line. You don't talk to a national treasure like that." The backlash was swift, merciless, and entirely deserved. Denise tried to explain herself in later interviews, claiming her words had been taken out of context. But the more she spoke, the worse it got. The public had seen the footage. They knew what they'd witnessed. A moment of arrogance met with quiet, devastating grace. And when the dust settled, one truth remained undeniable. Judi Dench didn't need to prove herself that day. Denise Welch did, and she failed spectacularly. It was a calculated move, but also an honest one. The other hosts knew how bad this looked and wanted distance, both professionally and personally. No one wanted to be caught defending what had happened. Denise, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. The producers were livid. They weren't just dealing with bruised egos. They were facing a PR disaster, angry viewers, outraged headlines, and a mountain of backlash. And at the center of it all was Denise Welch, who had turned what should have been a light celebratory interview into a televised implosion. After the broadcast, one of the senior producers pulled her aside. His voice was calm, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked. "You insulted one of the most respected actresses alive, on live television. Do you realize how bad this looks for us?" Denise tried to defend herself, but he cut her off. "Save it," he said sharply. "We'll handle the damage control. But you need to think very carefully about how you handle yourself from now on. This cannot happen again." She nodded, but it was clear she still didn't truly understand. Denise had built her career on provocation, on saying the things others wouldn't. But this time, she hadn't been bold. She'd been reckless. And now the consequences were real. In the days that followed, the story refused to die. Every major outlet ran it. Every talk show dissected it. Social media turned it into a national conversation. Through it all, Judi Dench stayed silent. She didn't need to explain herself. Her silence said everything. She had walked away with grace, and that was enough. Denise, on the other hand, was unraveling. She'd gone from being known as a fiery, outspoken host to being the woman who insulted Judi Dench. And that title stuck. On set, the tension was unbearable. The other hosts were polite but distant. The crew did their jobs, but the warmth was gone. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them favored her. During a production meeting later that week, One of the veteran hosts finally spoke up. "We can't just pretend this didn't happen," she said. "Judi Dench walked off our show. That's not something we can sweep under the rug." The producer nodded. "We'll make a statement. We'll apologize publicly to Dame Judi and make it clear we don't condone what was said." Denise shifted uncomfortably. She knew what that meant. She was about to be made the scapegoat. "Wait," she protested, her voice rising. "You're saying I'm the problem? I was doing my job. I was asking tough questions. That's what we do." The producer's expression hardened. "There's a difference between asking tough questions and being disrespectful," he said evenly. "You crossed that line, and now everyone's paying the price." Denise opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She knew he was right. She just wasn't ready to admit it. The meeting ended, and Denise sat alone for a while, staring at the empty chairs. For years, she'd taken pride in being bold, in pushing people's buttons, in saying what others wouldn't dare. But now, she finally understood the cost of that bravado. Her honesty had humiliated someone who had earned nothing but reverence, and it had come back to destroy her credibility. Meanwhile, Judi Dench carried on with her life. She attended premieres, gave interviews, worked on new projects. She didn't mention the incident once. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more dignity than any public statement ever could. In time, the incident became a cautionary tale, a reminder that respect still matters, that words carry weight, and that not every honest opinion needs to be aired for the sake of television drama. Legends like Judi Dench had earned their place. They didn't need to prove their worth to anyone, least of all to someone chasing controversy for attention. For Denise, the future was uncertain. Her reputation was damaged. Rebuilding it would take time, humility, and restraint, qualities she had never been known for. But one thing was certain. She had learned a hard, lasting lesson about the cost of arrogance and the value of respect. In the end, the story was simple. A host crossed a line, a legend walked away, and the world watched as one person's lack of respect turned a routine interview into a moment that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. It was a clash that didn't need to happen. But it did, and it left no doubt that some people, no matter how confident or outspoken, must learn that respect isn't optional. Judi Dench was one of those rare few who had earned it completely, and Denise Welch learned that lesson the hard way.